Good evening and welcome to episode 8 of Metal Sanctuary. This is going to be another band review. This time we're going to be talking about band Type O Negative, which Robin is the one who brought up, and she is actually the very first guest we get to have on Metal Sanctuary. A little bit camera shy, and so she might not say a whole lot, but you know, most of that talking is up to me. Anyway, so first of all, Type O Negative, a gothic slash kind of doom metal band with what I consider to be industrial influence put in. Coming out of the ashes of a band called Carnivore that Peter Steele was in. They did a couple records, the self-titled, and for the life of me I can't remember the second one right offhand. They were like a thrash crossover band. They did a couple records, and the band pretty much split up. Record company told Peter that he was still under contract, so he assembled some other musicians in 1989, changed a few of the these sound bits, became Type O Negative. The first album, Origin of the Feces, still had a good bit of the faster paced stuff that he was doing with Type O Negative, but really 1993's Bloody Kisses, which was the first album I ever listened to, and also the first album that she's also listened to, I think really kind of changed the game and what they were going to sound like. For me, that's not my favorite album. It's got my favorite song, Black Number One, and you know, to just expand more on that album, when you first got into that album, what was it that really drew you to the sound of that band?
Just the darkness of the music, something I've never heard before. It was like, wow. And I couldn't stop listening to it. I listened to the tape like over and over, like every day. It's like, man. And it was just so different from the metal that I listened to. So
Tapes, children,
Tapes.
back in the day.
Yeah.
From Florida, so she knows a little bit about the, you know, Florida death metal stuff, obituary stuff like that. So completely different to hear. Like for me with Type O, it was a band, you know, just not just going on with the music sound, like Peter Steele's voice to me just kind of, wasn't just so a gothic and what people in the 90s want to consider gothic, because gothic really had like a completely different meaning. It was about being dark and being, you know, wearing black and painting your nails white. But gothic, you know, in early history, really there was a romanticism part for gothic. You know, if you really think about it, you know, things like Dracula and stuff like that, there's romance, and it's not just about death and evil. There's a romantic tint to it. And I think that the very dark, kind of painful sound that came out of Peter's voice is what drew me to the band, and just made it really, just made the songs feel real. I got the pleasure to see them in 2000. They toured on their World Coming Down album, which was the second album that I bought. That was probably the actual first real metal show I'd actually been to, and they had Cold Chamber opening up for them. And it was just like an insane thing, because Peter Steele's just, he's huge. And like even on stage, like, you know, sometimes you go, you know, shows and you see these guys you think are big, and then you get out and you're like, your height or shorter. You know, like I heard like Kerry King's like 5'6", like Danzig's like 5'5", and Peter Steele looked every bit of like 9 feet fucking tall. You know, and he's got, you know, the wife beater shirt on, big fucking arms. He's got this huge bass, and there's part in the show where he's, you know, taking the wine bottle and kind of like fiddle bassing with it, and then he like rips his bass strings out and stuff. And, you know, like he's got such a dark humor about him. Like even just in interviews I've seen. And then, like, you know, they'll do this interview, they'll introduce a song, and he's like, you know, this is probably our happiest song. It's called "Everything I Love Is Dead," and you're just like, that's great, you know. I mean, and they did very well with the cover songs they did. I mean, you got songs like "Summer Breeze," which they did early on. Off that World Coming Down album, they had the Day Tripper medley, which was like really cool to hear, like a Beatles song done like that. A couple different Black Sabbath covers they did. They did Black Sabbath and Paranoid. The only band I've ever heard to make Paranoid like 3 times as long as it is. It's like an 8-minute fucking cover, and then Paranoid's like a 2.5-minute blip. You know, but, you know, just for me, what just really drew me to that band was it was just kind of like they weren't really talking about what like the early 80s and late 80s and early 90s bands kind of did. You know, it was all about, you know, evil and this kind of stuff. They talked about real kind of like human emotions on this like really dark level. And Peter's voice really reflected that. And for me, you know, you can have a great drummer in the band, you can have a great guitar player in the band, you know, the lyrics can be great, but the singer, if he does not convey the lyrics with the voice to match it, it's not going to matter. You know,
And he's got a very powerful voice.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, one of the things that really, you know, just kind of struck me with him was he was just like very honest in any interview you ever get to watch with him. I mean, he was, you know, music, he really didn't give a shit about being in a band, honestly. His, you know, view was, I'm working as a, you know, driving a garbage truck. I'm happy. He's like, if the band thing doesn't work, great. I get to drive a fucking garbage truck. That's all I can. I mean, very blue collar guy from, I believe, I want to think like Queens, New York, or somewhere in there, like the Bronx. But I mean, he was very a blue collar type work ethic to what he did. And unfortunately, in 2010, he was among a couple of the great ones that we lost that year, as well as, you know, Ronnie James Dio, Paul Gray from Slipknot we lost also in that year. And for me, you know, the Dio and the Steel deaths really hurt me hard, because I really just started getting back into typo. I put them on the shelf for a while because I started getting just like heavier stuff, getting more involved in death metal and stuff like that, and finding more thrash bands to get into. And it was just like, you know, it was shocking. I think he was only like 40 something, and you know, the diagnosis was he died of heart disease. They didn't say if it was a heart attack or what exactly. It was just, you know, heart disease just in general. And, you know, it really sucks when you look at the musicians we lose way before their time and the reasons why. And a lot of it has to do with like drugs and alcohol, which I don't profess to know a lot about his substance use. I do know he used to drink quite a bit. I know he had, once he kind of knew there was heart disease history in his family, he kind of tapered off with the alcohol and stuff like that. But, you know, anytime you lose somebody big, that's just, in my mind, it's just a huge influence, because especially a lot of the later bands that would come out, the doomier type bands, you know, I think kind of took off what Typo did. There's been branch off bands from them, from some of the former members. Seventh Void, A Pale Horse Named Death, kind of follows still in that Typo stuff. And so I think that, you know, to lose Peter Steele was
going to replace his voice. I mean,
it's one of those things, like if you hear, you know, Rob Halford, you know who that is. Whether, you know, Owens did a great job filling in, you know, it's just, you know, they had talked about, and there was like a rumor, I'm pretty sure it was false, about doing like a reunion thing just to kind of do a tribute to him and bringing in Glenn Danzig to front the band. I think it was a false report, but I think that would be a very interesting choice, because he's got that kind of bluesy baritone type voice to him, and I think he could probably put those songs together well in a live show. Will we ever get it? I don't know. I know he's still doing his stuff with Danzig, currently doing some one-off reunion shows with most of the original Misfits lineup. But yeah, I mean, you know, some of the just like the comical humor. There you have a video. I don't remember the album it was off of. It was just like the song was about like, I hate to be me, and the video showed like, you know, people dressed up like Fred Durst and Britney Spears and you know, stuff like that. It was just like this funniest video, and it's one of their faster type songs. You know, they got songs like "Kill All the White People," and they're white people in a band. I mean, it's just like,
it's a good song,
you know, you got Christian Woman, Black Number One, October Rust for me was their kind of altogether great album. So, you know, and it's just very, very, just very different, because you know, with all the different fads that came in the 90s, you know, you had a lot of bands that sounded alike, and you had the rap kind of rock stuff that kind of blended together, and, you know, you had bands that were different. You had Type O, you know, White Zombie was different, Pantera was different, and, you know, what a fucking show that would have been.
Right.
You know, back in the 90s.
White Zombie was awesome to see in concert.
Pantera, White
Yeah.
Zombie, and Type O Negative.
That'd be an awesome concert.
3, like, totally separate things. Which
3
is
different sounds.
which
yeah.
is really a good thing, because when you go to a lot of shows, they have like 3 or 4 bands, and they play the same thing, like same style or whatever.
Right.
You know, regardless of, you know, the bands you had in it. Like, I saw Testament with Carcass and Slayer, and it was just like, that's like an onslaught the whole fucking time. Like, you really have to pace yourself with faster bands, because like, you're gonna get blown out once Carcass is done. How much energy you gonna have left? But you could see Type O Negative first, and then build it up a little bit faster with White Zombie, and then lose all your shit with Pantera. But, you know, that would have been pretty cool to see. But it'd be interesting to see if there's any tribute albums put out for Pantera, to see what kind of bands put what they put together vocally and stuff like that. You know, I definitely think they had a kind of a start of a subgenre, really. Maybe if you want to call it Gothic Doom or something like that. Which, I mean, there's bands like, I don't know if they necessarily kind of pattern themselves after, but like a band like My Dying Bride, who's done, you know, kind of like Death Doom and Melodic Doom type stuff. I think maybe they probably took some kind of influence from it. I'm not going to say 100% because, you know, I haven't looked any of that information up. But, you know, Type O Negative, just to me, I would probably have to put them somewhere in my top 10 favorite metal bands, because I think, unlike Pantera, and, you know, I have no disrespect towards Pantera, I think they just evolved with their sound, and, you know, there wasn't, you know, they didn't have they had more of a longevity, they last longer. Obviously, you know, Dying had a lot to do with that, but, you know, they probably never would have got back together anyway. But, you know, just the awesome, just like power. I think there was just, there's a thing for people to think something's heavy because it's fast, and that was like my mistake early on when I first started listening. I was listening to, you know, Megadeth and Metallica, and I thought, okay, well, you know, all these slower kind of bands, that's not metal. Like, when I first, you know, I think the first song I ever heard with Judas Priest was like Breaking the Law. I'm like, okay, that's not really metal. And then you go back and hear it, and you like hear the older stuff, the non-commercial stuff, and then I was like, well. Then when I eventually found, you know, Black Sabbath, I'm like, this is fucking heavy as hell. And I think that's probably the main drawing force between Type O's music as a difference between Carnivore when he first started. Because, like I said, they're, you know, in New York, and the hardcore scene is there. And, you know, the thrash has just kind of started building up. You had, you know, Anthrax was going at it, Overkill, even though they were from Jersey. And then I think the first SOD album was like 87 or so, so like a couple years before or around the same time that Carnivore kind of got together. So that was kind of big. The crossover thing had kind of already started. So it's just very interesting to hear how Pete Steele's voice went from Carnivore to Type O, because it was different. I mean, he had a real kind of like a thrashier style voice, and I don't know if you ever got to listen to any of those that early stuff.
A little bit.
Like they had this, I mean, and for a band that was, you know, kind of in the crossover area, they had a song called World War III and 4, like a 10.5-minute fucking song. And, you know, versus they'd have a 35-minute clip called Jack Daniels and Pizza, and it's just the sound of somebody throwing up. I mean, so that again, I think probably has a lot to do with just the mindset of Peter Steele, because he was like, I'm not taking this music to be that serious, because if it doesn't fucking work out, I want to be a garbage man. You know, and I think that I think a lot of times musicians and, you know, rock stars, whatever, take themselves way too fucking seriously. You know, yeah, and sometimes you can get real good interviews, and they might be down to earth guys and everything, but I think some of them kind of seek the limelight more than others. Kerry King, Scotty, and you're in like every documentary. But I mean, like, if you just want to see some like just great interviews with him, look up. He's got like about a 10.5-minute part in this documentary called Death Metal, a documentary. It's split up all in between the stuff or whatever. I think like the whole full clip is probably somewhere on YouTube. But that's where Typo is and always will be for me. Is just it's real. It's some of the stuff they talk about is going to be dark, and you may not necessarily look at it as being, because there's stuff like talking about like vampire type stuff, but I mean you can joke around with that kind of stuff, and you can also, I think the songs he's had on there, he's talked about breakups and stuff. I think Black Number One, it was actually about that. So they had the Origin of I think it was either Origin of the Feces or like the next EP that came out was like a bunch of live tracks they actually faked, and there's a part where he's like he's yelling at the crowd. He's like, "Hey, we've just been told there's a bomb in the building, so everybody get the fuck out," and stuff like that. I mean, that to me, that's just kind of like the attitude of rock and metal in general, just not giving a fuck. And this whole mainstream thing, which Typo never really got into, because I think the first time I actually heard of them, I don't remember the song it was. It was on the Mortal Kombat soundtrack. And they had bands like Napalm Death was on there, Fear Factory was on there, and I know Typo was on there because I just remember his voice. But I know the first time I got it was Bloody Kisses, because I had a bunch of friends I was in the Navy with, they're like Typo Negative, this, that, and I had seen some CDs, so I bought it. And it's just one of those things. That was one of the cases where it wasn't the album cover, because there's really not too much to that album cover, really. And there really never was for most of them. I mean, they always kind of had that dark green on a black background, something kind of cool maybe, but it was. And I think that, to me, just for me personally, when I listen to a band and I've got their CD and I'm looking at the cover, the colors of the album really resonate with me with the sound. Like, I think, like, just the tone of the green on A Justice for All, and then you hear the raw kind of lack of production. I think it mixes well together. I think like Ride the Lightning. Whenever I hear a song off Ride the Lightning, there's like a blue like tint in my brain when I'm thinking about the songs. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. But anyway, Typo Negative, great band. That's the second band on the review, and this will be up later tonight. God bless. Stay metal.